go ahead and get started, and if our other panelists are able to join us, we'll roll with the flow. Welcome. How are you doing, Planet FunCon? Woo! It's so wonderful to be back.
Yes.
You all feeling funky?
Yeah,
You should smell me.
No.
It's not the clothes I wore today.
Oh boy.
I'm feeling it.
There's the real horror, right?
Horror.
Yes. So I am Dr. Eric Russell, and I am a psychology professor at Illinois State University. I'm a lover of all things nerdy, and I'm fortunate to work at a place that lets me connect that with my professional life. So one of my many interests is doing research on the psychology of horror entertainment. I'm teaching classes on it as well, and so I found some cool people to sort of discuss this with me, and you're all here because you're probably very similar. What's interesting about horror entertainment, right? Oldest recorded history, probably before that. We see it cross-culturally, but it's an interesting paradox, right? The whole point of horror stories are to provoke negative feelings. Dread, suspense, disgust, fear, things that we would normally avoid in real life. But those of us who this is our jam, we're drawn towards it. Why is that? Well, there's a lot of answers to those questions, and we're not settled yet, which is part of the fun. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to introduce the panelists, and we'll learn a little bit about them. And then I've got specific questions tailored to each of them. We'll riff on that for a while. In the latter half, we'll open up questions to the audience. So first, to my left, we have Ben Wolf, author, ghostwriter, editor, and writing coach. Ben has written many books in various genres. Specifically fantasy, sci-fi, and horror, often combining elements of each into a magic brew for various readers.
Sorry. Hi there. Sorry to be late.
Hello.
Hi.
So, Ben, what do you enjoy about horror entertainment?
There is so much to enjoy about horror. It's hard to nail down one thing. I think just the thrill of it. And thrill is such an overarching term, too, because you can be thrilled by action, you can be thrilled by comedy, you can be thrilled by a roller coaster. But with horror, it's a different type of thrill. It's a more primal and deep-seated experience in terms of horror when you get that thrill.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Ben. All right, our next panelist is Lenore Zann, actor of stage and screen. Lenore has worn many hats and acted in many different genres. Early in Lenore's film acting career, she was in several horror and suspense films, which I'll be asking about a little bit later. So, what do you like about scary stories?
Well, for one thing, I noticed Ben's books down there, and I was like, those look really good.
Well, thank you.
I'm going to have to get a couple of them to take back to Canada.
Your check's in the mail.
No, it's true. They look really, really, really good. I don't know. My dad got me into suspense and thrillers when I was a kid, even murder mysteries and things like that. And I never thought when I was a child that I would be playing in movies where I got murdered like a million times in different ways. And so I don't enjoy watching them as much as I enjoy doing them. And I have been murdered in many very nefariously interesting ways. And it's always fun when a friend asks, "Oh, I see you were in Bells. What was that?" And I'm like, "Oh, I got blown up by a telephone in that one." You know, so I got a million stories about it, but it's more like it's fun. It's just fun to perform in them.
Excellent. Fascinated to learn more about being blown up by a telephone.
By Richard Chamberlain.
Excellent. So, thank you. So our next panelist is Jeri Shepard, author, playwright, editor, publisher, and writing coach. Jeri has written many books in various genres, both under her name and under the pen name Reggie Virgie. Jeri has recently returned to the genres that were her first loves: science fiction, fantasy, and action. Jeri, what do you like about horror?
So I think with horror, there's this darkness that I believe is in all of us. And as like humans, you know, we turn that piece off because, you know, we're generally good people. But how many of us have ever, like, you know, you've gone through a bad breakup, or you know, there's the wench at work who like sits on her butt while you're working yours off and everything is handed to her. And let's be honest, we get some really dark thoughts. And again, as humans, we shut that stuff off because, you know, that's not how we live in society by digging into that. But when you are writing it, you get to go, yeah, this is how this really goes down. Don't tick off a writer because they're going to capture that some way. And I just enjoy that play into that deep, dark area of our minds that we actually have to turn off in our day-to-day real lives.
You had me with that anecdote there. That's hypothetical, of course, right?
Of course, of course. I've never had those bad thoughts about exes or coworkers.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so our next panelist is Brianna West, author of prose and comics, focused mostly on the romance genre with elements of horror, fantasy, and the paranormal. Brianna's stories are set within the universe of her main series, Promiscuous Guardians. Brianna, what do you like about horror?
Well, unlike her, I'm going to be open about creating characters made out of people I hate and torturing them in the most grotesque way possible, because obviously I can't do it in real life without going to jail. So I actually really love writing horror elements with romance, because it's always like, you don't think, how are they going to stare lovingly into each other's eyes while they're stabbing a demon? But I find ways, and I also find ways to make a bromance happen while they're killing demons, and on the side too are like, should we make out after this? I don't know, probably. Right? So mine's always been, you know, horror always has elements of humor to it for me, because I think that nothing is better without comedy. So everything's made better with comedy, and there's always going to be some horrible, just grotesque scene before some really steamy stuff happens. And I'm not going to tell you what, but because that's for later in the evening panels. So.
But if you want to know, you can buy the books.
Yeah.
Which page should we specifically turn to?
This is where I plug in my stuff. Please check me out.
Excellent, thank you, Brianna. And our final panelist is Alyson Court, actor and director. Much of Alyson's work has been in children's entertainment, though a few shows have toyed with horror elements in child-accessible ways, such as voicing Lydia in the animated show Beetlejuice. Alyson has been a longtime voice of the character Claire Redfield in the horror survival game series Resident Evil. So Alyson, tell us what you like about horror.
Well, first of all, do you honestly think there's anything more horrifying than working in children's television?
Well, I've watched a lot of children's television, I can only
I'm sure
imagine.
just living with children is a horror made of its own.
I live it every day. No, I've been look, I think it balances me. I'd like to say that I'd like to believe that I'm a balanced person. So I have long wanted to just have enough money where I can have my own production company to make really ridiculous, over-the-top horror films. Like slasher films on a weekend, let's go out and film something, and then I go back to the day job of, you know, making children's television. And you would, like, there were so many people in the industry in children's television who were in the same boat. They're like, yes, let's go kill something, right?
Oh, yeah.
But I've always been a horror fan. I don't know everything that they just said, and maybe there's an aspect of the fact that, sorry to be a Debbie Downer, but human beings are really horrible. And left to our own devices when we lie in bed at night, especially as children, like your mind goes to horrible places and you think of these horrible creatures, and there is something comforting in watching a movie about it as a group where it feels better. You can exercise your own personal demons. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I love like everything what y'all are saying, because I could totally lecture and I'm not. But you know, this idea of thrill seeking, of balancing these positive and negative emotions, of wish fulfillment, of distracting oneself from the horror that is the real world, right? These are all things that that horror creators and theorists have suggested and have some interesting data for. What I'm going to do now is I've sort of created a question for each of you that I'll ask you, and then after you answer, the rest of the panelists can feel free to riff on that for a few minutes, and then we'll move on, and then after we get through that, we'll ask the audience questions as well. So this time we just had Alyson, we'll move this way back now. So.
No. Wait, I thought I had time.
So you voiced the character of Claire Redfield many times in the Resident Evil series. How do you sort of get in the zone and call forth the necessary emotions for that character when all you have is the voice, right? How do you draw the hypothetical audience in?
Ooh, that's a good question. How do you draw the audience in? Ultimately, I wish I could say that fell upon me as the voice actor. That actually comes down to the sound designer and mixing editor. Because if they mix it wrong, it's not going to be impactful at all. So I'd love to take credit for all those moments in those games that were really, really scary, but that was actually really good sound design. And it's funny how sound is one of the things least thought about in live action in particular, and it is so crucial. Good sound design is not like nowadays everything feels like it's overmixed. And sometimes the scariest scenes can be when the sounds that were in the background are suddenly gone. And it takes a few moments for that little spidey sense to creep up and be like, doot, 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 there's something really off. And then when you realize, oh my God, the birds are silent, or whatever it might be, you get goosebumps, right? Like, so how do you pull the audience in? You pull the audience in by caring about sound design, from the voice performance, from everything else that goes along with it. I don't know. And from an actor's point of view, think about, you just have to kind of be in the moment and trust the director and trust the writing. I remember the difference between the original Resident Evil 2 and then when we did Dark Side Chronicles. It's a lot more heavy breathing.
I was just gonna ask about your Bone and Grown game because it's like,
Yeah.
as a writer, I'm thinking in my head, but I have to write it. I'm like, oh.
Yeah. So modern day games, if, you know, when they do the remakes, it's like, more,
Yes.
that kind of thing. Right.
Yes.
So, you know, Leon, get down! Leon, get down! There's the remake for that.
There you go. You got 2 levels right there.
All right.
I was going to say something just to add to what you were just saying about the sound design, because like when you said that, I'm thinking of, you know, Psycho, and I'm thinking Jaws.
Yeah.
Jaws too. You know, like the
And there was literally nothing on screen because he couldn't
Right.
get the friggin' monster
Right.
to work.
Yeah.
So it's just black, but you hear that music and you're like,
Yeah, exactly. And that does put the audience into a frame of mind of anxiety and, you know, preparing for something. So yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's funny, there's an anecdote that John Carpenter likes to talk about with the original Halloween and how the test audiences before the score was even done, like no one thought it was scary. Like horrible reviews from test audiences. And then he put that score in and then boom, completely opposite direction.
Like all the senses need to be involved, and yet as writers we're like, we're writing the senses, so you literally have to, like, as a writer you have to encapsulate everything that's going on emotionally, internally, outwardly, and dialogue has to fit in, and you have to find a flow to make it all fit together as a scene.
Without overwhelming the reader.
Yeah, so it has, like, the flow can't be bogged down by
Right.
too much dialogue, too
Or
much
too much
description, you have to find a balance between all the things.
That's interesting because when, as an actor too, sometimes writers overwrite and
We
try
did
No.
not ever do that.
and
What do you mean we write too much?
you know, like, I don't mean in books, but I mean in scripts.
In script, it makes
Right.
sense because you don't need that much.
Yes,
It's gonna happen
and then
visually.
she does this, and then it's like, well, actually, I got cast. Trust me, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do this scene, and I'm gonna make it work. I don't need to be told my right hand lifts here.
See,
and
that's
then
where
whatever,
like you need to
know?
find a balance between creative freedom of the writer and the actor.
Yes.
You need to have freedom between both. So we rely on each other to be able to pick up on and
Yeah.
find a good in between.
Yeah, and the director too.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
they're
I mean,
probably
you know.
important.
Well, Brianna,
Oh, yes.
yes, while we're discussing that,
Yeah.
and things working together, your primary genre is romance with supernatural and paranormal characters. How do you approach working in elements of horror and romance together? How can they complement each other?
That's so easy. You just add blood, and then you make them fight things. So that's it's actually a lot of fun because one of the things that people forget about is that intense emotion is intense emotion. So usually when you're intensely like coming off of like a fight scene, stuff happens. People get romantic. They stare in each other's eyes and they're like, I mean, we're alive, aren't we? And so, of course, obviously, they make out because that's what happens in every movie. I just write it. I'm like, because horrific things are happening out there. We have to remember that there's always going to be some element of happiness and like, we're always going to be like, oh, I'm still human, I need to connect with things. And so when you're feeling a lot of rage, you need to come off it from, like happiness, remembering that, you're lucky to have your family or, we all went through this recently with the pandemic, but we all realized that there's so much more important things, but we got lost in the, okay, what's happening out there in the world. So when you pair romance and gore and horror and action, you're realizing those moments, those relationships are actually what carry you through. It's not the drive of what's going to happen tomorrow. It's the drive of the people around you and how important they are to you. So,
Can I ask a question myself? Because I'm curious about this, but they always say, that sex and death have always gone, like, throughout humankind, it's been like an attraction, a weird kind of, that they sometimes go hand in hand. Why is that?
well, if you think about it, right, like, if you just come off an intense emotion like rage, or like say you've gotten your heart broken, makeup sex is totally a thing. It's like, so is, like, if you're in pain, obviously you want to find something to either numb that pain or make it feel less painful. So connecting with somebody like that, you feel all kinds of emotions, and they're euphoric, they're, pleasurable, they give you a sense of like connecting with somebody else, feeling their warmth and realizing you're not alone. And I think that our biggest fear as people, especially like in gore themes and horror themes, being alone is terrifying. So finding somebody to not be alone ever because you have your counterpart with you to get through it, it doesn't make those things seem so scary.
Right? Go on.
No, thank you.
I also think, and this isn't as positive of a view, so I apologize. I'm going to bring the cynic nonfiction writer into the room here. But I also think that there's almost an element of this, the mystery and the unknown. And I think that, death is very unknown. And I think that, love is just, it's very unknown. When you're in it, when you can't be in it, when somebody else is in it and you're not, like, it's just, you're like, why? I don't get this. And I think there's something that we as humans, yes, we're always trying to figure out the answers to the mysteries, but I also think that we're kind of drawn to them, and we're drawn to the awe of this thing that is bigger than my understanding. And for some people that can be something spiritual, but it can also be these things, like these things that we just don't get as humans, these things that are bigger than us, like love, like death. And I think that, yeah, there's all of the beautiful positive stuff, but there's also this really ugly
You
negative
ain't
stuff.
right.
Sorry,
You ain't not saying that to me.
Can I just piggyback on that too? Also, God, you're surrounded, your book is
It's nothing but pessimistic.
I know. At the end of the day, that's all we are. Sex is life, and then there's death.
True.
Well, now that I'm going to go home and cry I hope these optimistic ways.
It was nice knowing y'all.
We'll pivot slightly to Jeri. So your current work is largely in speculative fiction and sci-fi genres. how do you see horror entertainment elements working with speculative fiction?
So, and this kind of goes back to like some of what I was first saying, that there are these dark elements in us. And I know there are pieces of like this book, which this is just, this like my current writing is, it's about humanity and it's about how we're, you know, engaging with one another as humans. And there are a couple of scenes that I initially had soft pedaled. And it became a little bit young adult as opposed to adult. And when I went through my editors and my beta readers, they're like, no, you actually have to write that scene. This can't be like this thing where it's like you go right up to the point and then the next day and looking back on it. No, you actually have to write that. And there were some horror-ish scenes, some scenes that went darker and uglier and whatnot than I, as a human, am comfortable doing. And a couple of scenes in particular, like I wrote them and I was kind of disgusted with myself. I was like, ugh, that came out of me. But it was those scenes that took the story and stepped it up to this next level, because like Brianna was talking about including all the senses, and gosh, that's such a horror thing. And like when you start to dig into what things smelled like and felt like and the emotions associated with them, and you're not just writing this is what it looked like, you know, I mean that's just, you know, one of our 5 senses or 6 senses if you also include that emotion, thought, feelings, imagining thing, you know. And when you add that stuff, when you add that ugly, dark crap in there that's like the reality of part of humanity, there's somebody who's reading that who's like, I get this, I feel it, and from that perspective, they're now in the story because they're made to experience, not just to read the words or see the words, they're experiencing it. And I think that horror, being highly sensory, is something that can add to any speculative fiction story in that way and pull people in.
Oh, I was just gonna say like gore. So what you were saying, but I add the humor element. So like there's goblin goo, which is what I referenced, and she's just covered in it. And there's like that internal dialogue of how many showers is this gonna take to come off of me. And I add with the paranormal reading, I don't see it a lot in romance genres, but that like internal dialogue of how am I going to wash this death off of me, and those kind of human thoughts we have when we're doing something that's gross and we're like, ew, I don't like the way that feels. But having those introspective thoughts in writing is actually really nice, because sometimes you can't have that in a movie or like a TV show unless there's like a narrative voice. So that's what's cool about writing and reading, because as a character you can hear, oh, they really don't like how this feels, and oh, they're really not happy about being covered in demon death. You know? Like, that's kind of a cool extra sense in writing.
Although we can act it.
Oh, I'm sure you can. She has said many a time she's acted in it and blown up afterwards.
That was a great transition to my next question.
Okay, go for it.
So Lenore, in the 80s you were in several horror and suspense films. Some of the ones that jumped out to me when I was looking through your IMDb was Happy Birthday to Me and Visiting Hours, so I'm a big 80s slasher fan. When acting in a horror film, how do you bring forth the emotions necessary to elicit fear in the audience while still knowing you're in a safe space on a film set?
Well, as Laurence Olivier would say, it's called acting.
If you'd learned to act, you wouldn't have to do this.
Exactly. I mean, it's interesting, you know, because again, it kind of boils down to directors too and their styles. So, and also who you're working with, how old they are. So, for instance, like directors, when they're working with children in particular, they'll just get them to do reactions, and they'll get them to do like 20 reactions, right? Like look scared, look happy, look shocked, look surprised, whatever. And then they'll use that in the movie or whatever, television show or whatever it is. And sometimes they do it to adult actors too. You know, if they try and force something out of them that they want, that maybe it might not be the actor's first idea or feeling to do. You know, like, open your eyes wider, open your mouth, you know. And of course, we're always in our underwear when we get murdered. Right?
Oh,
Aren't you like,
every single
right?
time.
Every time, right? And so, and I remember one guy that we worked on, Happy Birthday to Me, which was, I think that was my first horror film when I was 20. And his biggest direction was more blood. Like, more blood, more blood. He left us alone. It was just like, more blood, more blood. So, you know, again, it's like any acting job, really. You put yourself into the character, and then you just react as the character would react. And here's a story, Visiting Hours, which is actually a really good horror film, I think. We had
That's Michael Ironside.
Michael Ironside, yeah. And Star Trek, what's his name? Shatner, William Shatner,
Yeah.
Linda Pearl, and this wonderful actress. She's older, she's dead now, but she was fantastic. Anyway, Lee Remick?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Anyway, but there was a scene where the director and the producer, I had to get, my character was getting raped by the murderer, which is Michael Ironside, who's this big, scary guy. You've already seen him murder like 5 or 6 people, so you know he's the murderer. He's going around this hospital killing people. And my character, he invites her home, and she's like a street kid, whatever, you know. And so you're like, oh God, what's gonna happen? He's gonna kill her. And he ends up raping her, and this really quite horrendous scene, but he doesn't kill her. And in the scene, we got to the part where he wants to rape me and everything, and he has a knife, and they said, okay, now we want him to tear your blouse, your t-shirt blouse thing open with the knife. Now, Lenore, you know, I know you signed a thing saying you weren't going to show any nudity, but, you know, what are we going to do? We're going to have to show your breasts. Right? Right? Oh, and I'm 20,
Yeah.
right? And it's my first horror film. And I went, you know, and I feel proud of myself that I did this. I went, no, I'm going to stick to my contract. I'm sorry, that was in my contract. And they said, well, what should we do then? I said, well, as the knife is going down, ripping my shirt open, why don't you pan up and show my face? And show what I'm feeling, right?
Yeah.
What is she feeling at that time, as opposed to, ooh, we're just going to get a breast shot,
Yeah.
right? So that's in the movie, and they did do that.
Nice.
But oh my God. Yeah, but that's the sort of thing we have to deal with all the time, right?
Well,
Especially when you're younger.
it's and that stuff too is why there are certain rules now.
Mhm.
Hard rules with our union because of
Yeah.
Good.
people going through crap like that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Thank you, yeah.
Well, it's hard to hear, but it's definitely something, like it leaned too heavily on that fact and not on the actual emotion of the characters, and you know, it's running away, it's using it as an opportunity to sexualize something that shouldn't actually be sexualized in that moment. It's about the horror of the event, not,
Right.
you know, and as women especially, like, and as somebody who writes about this stuff, because I do have a dark paranormal romance that leans as a survivor myself, I lean into that rage and that anger that I felt growing up and having to deal with circumstances like that. And I actually use it as a way of bringing my character in a place where, what if I were to give in to that rage? You know, she goes on a killing spree, you know, especially very like needlessly killing whoever, you know, she feels is punish worthy. And sometimes those emotions are important when you read them. It's just very important that we don't like highly sexualize them, because it isn't about that. It's about the horror, the emotion, and the rage that is that thing.
Instead of objectifying.
Exactly.
Yeah. Especially those circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's not to say that there aren't great examples of TNA, and both male and female, and horror. Like there could be one of my all-time favorite films is American Werewolf in London. And that is where it's perfection in terms of whether it's their sex scene, which is predominantly him pleasing her anyway. Hey.
Show's over.
And he's running around naked in the zoo, you know, like, and then you've got the porno scene, right? And it's all like beautiful balance there, lots of fun. So that movie hits you in all the right places, comedy and sex and horror. But then to take it, so many horror films that then glorify like actual like rape scenes or whatnot, where it's not, you were doing this so wrong.
So wrong.
Yeah.
So wrong.
And that's like what happens in writing too. We have to remember, one, that there's a balance to strike. It's also very important, especially now for me, to warn readers that there are trigger elements to my reading, but it's not something that I think we should get rid of. We should be talking about the experience because it is cathartic to know that you're not alone and that you're not the only one who's gone through something like that, and that you could become this rageful beast, or you could work through it and rise above it. And I have both, And actually, as a writer, being able to write that experience has been really cathartic for me because I'm like, oh, I get to like kill evil men and like just destroy people, but also in my day life, I'm so nice to like people like Eric who don't deserve my rage. Or Ben, I forgot
Ben's
Ben.
feeling really safe being in the next question here. It's like,
Where are we going there?
Well, it's the most awkward segue ever. We're going to talk about humor in horror.
I previewed some of the questions I was going to ask, but yes. So we've talked about balancing of different emotions, different elements, positive emotions, negative emotions. You mentioned with American Werewolf in London, right? A lot of people will talk about that film and how funny there are certain elements of it. And that was around the time you also had Joe Dante's The Howling and things like that, and really kind of reinvigorating horror in the 80s. So, Ben, I know you've written with horror and you've written humor and a nice balance of both, playfully. How do you, these emotions may seem to be counter, but they can be complementary. How do you see them interacting?
I think they can interact really beautifully at times, and by beautifully, I mean with the full spectrum of the color red in terms of bodily fluid, spurting everywhere or drenching people's clothing, or in my Santa series, in the first book, Month of Frost, Santa's coat is initially white, and I'll let you figure out how it turns red. And then it's just red from that point on throughout the rest of the series. So that's sort of an origin story that I made up. Also, someone just caught a Pokemon, so congrats. Proud of you. Live your best life. Speaking of humor in horror, that's a good moment of levity. I appreciate that. Basically, for me, the bigger I can go with a really horrific scene, the funnier it tends to get. And I don't say that as any sort of masochist or sadist or anything like that. It's not just making it big. I shouldn't say that it's only that. It's not just making it big, it's also how the characters react to it. If your characters, for folks who work in a butcher shop, they're interacting with blood and gore and raw meat all day. So they're to some degree desensitized to this. Well, there comes probably several points in the course of this series where the same characters, they continue through each book, and so at some point, this just doesn't faze them anymore, so it's just like, oh, I'm covered in blood again. Oh, I'm covered in entrails or whatever from this monster that we just killed.
Goblin goo and demon death. Right?
That's what made
That
me.
is literally all I read because it's teenage girls or young girls who have never experienced it going, oh, why is it so gross? They never talked about this in movies. So the having the blood and guts come over you, because of course I choose to have my creatures die in the most explosive way possible. Because who doesn't?
It's more exciting that way.
You know, blood on the floor. She's
Yeah.
like, who's gonna clean this up? No one.
Santa,
Because they don't.
yeah. Santa has a 3-barreled shotgun, and so you can imagine what that would do to the head of a zombie polar bear. It's
I mean, the
exciting.
fact that you use zombie polar bear and a 3-barrel
Yeah.
gunshot, I was
I mean-
like, I'm already interested.
Merry Christmas.
If you were in horror, excess,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah.
Excess is a huge part of it, yes. That's a
I
good
feel
way of
like
summarizing
anything
it.
paired up with comedy always wins because everybody wants to laugh. I'm sorry,
Mhm.
like especially after you watch like an action scene and they're like, you know, it's really horrible events happening that you're like, they're making jokes about, you know, who's got, you know, that and who's like, oh, you wore the wrong outfit to the
Mhm.
battlefield. Like, who wears Converse? We're running on grass and blood. It's gonna slip you out. You can't traction in that.
Physical comedy, pratfalls, right? There's that thin line between laughing and screaming. We got about 10 minutes left. I want to open up to audience questions. If there aren't any questions, I can always throw more out. But, yeah.
Hi, do you guys prefer more of the classic horror, or do you like the unique direction that modern day horror is going?
Great question.
You wanna go first?
Sure.
Go down the way?
Yes and no.
Mic drop.
Classic horror is classic horror for a reason. It lacks a lot of the sophistication is not quite the right word. Maybe we'll say technical sophistication that modern special effects and computer graphics and even just copious amounts of blood, right, Lenore? You can't always, back in the 50s or even before that, you couldn't just throw blood at it and expect people to be terrified. You had to work at it a little harder because special effects back then weren't what they are now. And I'm by no means an expert in special effects, but I have seen a lot of movies, and so that's where this is coming from. So the beauty, for example, if you've ever seen Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with Spencer Tracy from way back, have you seen it? Oh, it's so good. The acting in that and just the menace that Spencer Tracy, who's one of the greatest actors of all time, is able to convey when he is Mr. Hyde. There's a specific scene where he's got, do you remember what the girl's name was? She was in Casablanca. What was her name?
Ingrid Bergman.
Was it? I think it was
Ingrid
Ingrid
Bergman
Bergman.
was.
She's this barmaid, and he's taken a liking to her as Mr. Hyde, and he's corrupt and awful and horrible. There's this scene where he's got her essentially locked in his apartment, and he's just sitting there playing the piano saying, what should we do tonight? Should we play cards? Should we do this? And she's just like, brilliant actress as well. She's just, whatever you want, we'll do whatever you want, just trying to prevent him from hitting her again because it was clearly a very abusive relationship. That was like in the 1930s, maybe the 40s or 50s, somewhere in that 20-year period. And it's visceral. And it didn't have to rely on, Kill Bill style blood shooting everywhere or like stuff in my books in order to convey, again, that sense of menace. It was all Spencer Tracy and really great writing and great direction and great counteracting by Ingrid Bergman, creating that really beautiful sense of horror and the dynamic that these two characters shared. So if you want like a master class in how to do really great horror and menace without having to resort to the gore, the violence, and all that fun stuff, that's a really great example. Another really great example is Wait Until Dark, which is, see, they know, they know, Audrey Hepburn, one of her finest movies. And I mean, she was brilliant in everything, but Audrey Hepburn is blind. She plays a blind woman in the movie, and there's a conspiracy going around her, and it all takes place, most of it takes place in her apartment. She knows her way around the apartment, she knows what's there, and then there's a group of con men who are trying to find something that they think was left in her apartment by someone else. So that's another really great example of that. It's a real slow burn. A friend of mine, actually my friend who did the audiobook for What Frost, I sat him down. He's a professional actor in New York. This was when we were still in high school. I sat him down and made him watch that movie with us. He was joking and laughing in the front half of it. And as the tension started increasing, he got quieter and quieter. And then there was a jump scare moment, the one crucial jump scare, I'm sure if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. And he went, whoa! And he like leaped out of his chair, and we laughed our heads off. So
Eric just lost his hair.
Away from the speaker.
Eric does
It was
have
that
to
exact
feel
reaction. Yes. So, apologize for the rabbit trail. I don't want to monopolize too much more time, but the old stuff is great because it didn't have to rely on the new technology and special effects. But with that said, some of the new special effects and technology can really take horror in new and compelling directions too. So I don't want to discredit that entirely.
We've got a couple minutes left. I want to see if there's another audience question.
I don't have really a question. I don't really microphone either because I'm a loud person. More of a comment about the humor and horror. One of the funniest scenes in movies is the Black Knight.
Yes.
Talking about blood spurting everywhere. That's hilarious. Like, there's something about the over the top
Yeah.
stuff that is. I think you get to a point where this is so horrific that I can't make it any more horrific, so it's just funny now.
Right.
One of my favorites in recent history is You're Next. Have you seen You're Next? It's fantastic, and it's suspenseful. It's got a lot of gore. It's got humor. I highly recommend it. It is a tight film, and I think that's what we're lacking with a lot of current day, like either the shaky cam or the jump scares, or the sound design where it's like, no, you must jump now. Yeah. So there's not a lot these days that I actually enjoy. Occasionally, like my husband and I are completely into horror, and that's what he'll put on. He'll be like, what do you want to fall asleep to tonight, honey? Oh, I don't know, what stabby thing? Yeah, healthy.
That's a great relationship.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Do you want to know if you're going to wake up in the morning, or do you need me to?
But a great example, the original Woman in Black. It was the BBC, made for TV. So everything is orange and like 1970s, 80s, beige, brown, like real yellow Betamax tinge. And the special effects makeup is terrible, so that's one place where we have come a long way, obviously, although I would argue that John Carpenter's The Thing can't be beat, so I will rest with you on that one.
Fight me.
But Alfred Hitchcock style camera angles, and again, sound design.
Yep.
That movie relies on sound design, and you will jump out of your skin and pee your pants with the jump scares in that one. Yep.
I'm going to fight for New Age, only because I don't know if anybody's seen the Haunting on Hill House, that series on Netflix. Okay, look, I love these ones that you literally have to piece it together and you don't know until the end, and it's literally taking you on a ride all the way through. And it doesn't rely heavily on jump scares. I mean, they're in there, but it relies on the characters and the story to carry you through. So they did that. I didn't like the other two series. It was the Bear Manor and Bly Manor, and then the new one, Midnight Mass, which was good, but it was like nothing beat the first season. But that one I really enjoyed. Almost the WTF every episode. You're like, what did I just watch? And you get to the end, you're like, now I have to rewatch it so I know what I'm talking about all the way through. So it's one of those that like you just look, because you also find new things each time you watch it.
Well, and what's interesting is like, if you go back to like your Spencer Tracy 1930s, version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. By the way, definitely that one, not the David Hasselhoff one. Don't get this one wrong.
That's scary for a whole other
Different level of horror. But you think of that, and then you go into like some of the really bloody stuff, and then you have like the 80s and 90s movies where you've got like you know, Jason and Freddy Krueger, and I mean, Freddy Krueger, he started out really scary, and by the end it was funny, you know, but it was, and now then, and you put it back, and now I think some of that psychological stuff, like from the early horrors coming back, and I think you go through these cycles, and you think about the world we're in today, you know, we need more What the Frost, you know, we need more, like, because let's be honest, it's a
From
horror
her mouth
show.
to God's ears,
Right,
friends.
right. And when you're done with that, pick up that fall. No, but really, I think they all have their season. I think they have their season, and if you look at if you want the horror show, just turn on the morning news.
Yeah.
And then like go for the fiction. And I think right now we need more, you know, more of that lightness in our books and in our movies, and more of that joy and humanity.
I love it
So-
because story writers are always like, why'd they steal my plot line for our reality? I
We're
tried this
time.
yesterday.
So
Copyright,
what I want to do
anybody?
now is I want to give everybody a chance to tell the audience where they can find you, meet you, enjoy the shared nerddom. So we'll start with Ben. Where can they find you here and online?
Walk into the vendor hall and look straight ahead. I'm literally the first booth right there because Marcus is my good buddy and he loves me truly and deeply. It's like the Princess Bride. Online, it's real easy. It's benwolf.com. Wolf is spelled like the animal, so there's no E at the end.
Thank you.
I've got an
Wolf
idea.
hits.
I've got an idea for a movie. How about Santa with a shotgun?
Let's do it.
You haven't heard of Hobo with a
Hobo with a
shotgun?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it. Yeah.
Robert Rodriguez.
Jason Eisner.
Yeah.
Jason Eisner.
Nice.
Look it up.
Okay.
Santa with a shotgun. You heard it here, folks.
You should also look at the short Tree Venge. Tree Venge is beautiful.
Tree Venge.
Tree Venge.
I'm taking notes.
He's he's Canadian, right?
Yep.
He's from Nova Scotia, I
Yeah.
think, isn't he?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, Lenore Zann on Facebook, at Zann Lenore on Twitter, and at Lenore Zann on Instagram. You can find me, follow me. I'm doing a ton of different things. And what was the other question? Oh, where do we find us here? You walk straight in, you go past, you buy a book, you keep going, and I'm at the very back. In fact, Alyson and I are both over to
On the
the
back.
right, at the very, very back. And the X-Men, all my X-Men folks are there with me. I play Rogue on the X-Men at the end of these
Jeri Shepard, I'm at booth 43, and you can find me online at faultbook.com. Really easy, we made it difficult for you. Or you can just grab one of these free bookmarks from me, and you can, it has the website, you can scan it and all of that. But yeah, I'd love it if you visited me here at the con, booth 43.
All right, well, you guys are all going to go the opposite direction of those two. I'm going to be on the far end left wall, next to all the cool toys, so you can buy there too. You can find me at authorbriannawest.com.
Back, yeah, again, back wall, you go in, go right, hit the wall, go back. And I'm next to Lenore. And you can find me on Twitter at Alyson the Other, Alyson with a Y. And if you come to the booth, if you are into horror, which I'm assuming everybody in this room is, and you're into like, if you like gory, graphic stuff, then hubby has a comic book. This is just to make you all stare at my boobs right now.
Yes.
That is the cult
You
of law,
did.
and it is pretty dang graphic. Yeah.
Well, thank you all panelists. So please give the panelists a round of applause. My name is Eric Wesselman, as I mentioned earlier. You can find me online at Eric Wesselman on Twitter, or if you go to the Department of Psychology at Illinois State University's homepage, you can find out some of the things I write on, some of which are horror related. And I hope that thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your con.